I'm going to get into the topic of nutrient management, manure risk management in particular. And I kind of want to start with a story, no disrespect to Andy at all here. I was on a dairy farm the other day. I was up in Canada actually, and they don't have a regulatory agency up there per se, but their Environment Canada group is wanting to adopt the tool I'm going to show you today, our application risk management system. And so I was up there with one of their staff going to a few farms to enroll them in this project as like a pilot. And the gentleman I was with starts talking about the program, and he prefaces it by talking about waste management and relating that to the Waste Nutrient Act that they have. And the farmer stopped him and said, if you call this stuff waste one more time, you have to leave my farm. He's like, this is one of the most valuable products I have. If I didn't have this nutrient, do you know how much fertilizer I'd have to buy? If I didn't have this nutrient, do you know how poor my soil would be? And he went on, and I just sat there, and I had to hold myself back from giving him a high five. I was so impressed with that. But it's very true, right? So there's a big difference between waste management and nutrient management. Does anyone know what that difference is? It's how much you apply. The minute you go over more than you need, it's a waste product. It's got to leave some way, right? It's going to go down through the soil as a leaching. It's going to go off your soil as runoff. It's going to go up in the air as volatilization. You're wasting it. We don't want to waste this product. You may have a lot of it, maybe more than you kind of want. I don't care. You're going to find another place and make it a valuable product somewhere else. So I may be biased as a nutrient management specialist, but I think manure is the coolest thing on your farm. Milk is a byproduct of your manure production, as far as I'm concerned. And for all the other farmers that get to use this stuff, dairy farmers, potato farmers, all those other guys, you are so lucky to have what is probably a free product for you, just a hauling cost for the most part, that the value of this product hasn't been recognized is kind of sad. So one day I hope you get $100 a pound for manure or more than that, because it's a cool product. So with that rant over, we're going to talk about how to keep that product where it belongs, on your field. So I don't want it to leave, you don't want it to leave, regulators don't want it to leave, nobody wants it to leave. So let's talk about ways that we can do that. So first I'm going to talk about basically what causes a runoff event. And this is really obvious, but I feel like we need to talk about it to set the stage. So there's 4 things that have to happen for a runoff or leaching or some other loss way to occur. And this is on all fields, all farms, all products that you produce. One is it's got to be there. So it has to be available. That means that you've put it on at a rate that's higher than you need. You've put it on at more than your crop can take off, or you've just put it on and those things haven't occurred yet. So it's got to be there. Step 1. Number 2 is that there's got to be some way that wasn't done right? So if it's done right and you put it on, it's going to stick around. But if for some reason you got the timing wrong, you put it on with the wrong method, you put way too high of a rate that was unnecessary, or you failed to maybe install helpful application practices or other conservation practices, like you've got buffers or you're using setbacks or whatever it may be. So somehow that didn't happen. You're grazing too close to a stream, whatever it may be. And then of course you need a catalyst, something that's going to cause this kind of available stuff that may be in the wrong place to move. So we need rain, or maybe it's flooding, maybe it's a high water table, or it's wind blowing it off of there. If you're piling up this dry stuff out in the field because you're going to use it later and it's kind of dry and you get a bunch of wind, and even though you were so far back from something, whoop, it blew over. Or you're playing with a big gun at higher than 10-mile-an-hour wind that day, it's going to travel, it's going to drift somewhere. So there are those kind of catalyst events. And then you have one other thing that kind of correlates there is poor field conditions. So if you've got the wrong soil type that you're applying on that time of year, so you've got a really clay-based soil, let's say, and it's saturated. Saturated soil is the worst thing you can apply to right next to, completely frozen soil. Both of those things, if you get anything on top of there, any bit of rain, it has to move. It's got to go somewhere, and it's probably going to go off. Maybe you have a significant slope or no surface cover. You harvested your corn off and you didn't plant a cover crop, or you've got your berry rows with nothing in the middle. That stuff's going to move. And the things that move off aren't always just manure, right? This could be soil loss, which is a real detriment to your farm. You spend a lot of time building up that soil. It's the most important thing you have on your farm. So losing that, and here we're extremely lucky where we live. I mean, we've got 6–8% organic matters. You go to other parts of the country and they are stoked to have 2%. And they do everything they can to keep every millimeter of soil on their surface. So we're a little bit spoiled here in having tremendous soils, and it's very fertile, and it's such a wonderful place to farm. So, but the point being, we still want to keep all that soil on the surface. We've worked hard for it, and you should stick around. So these are the types of things that we talk about. Pollutant availability, that relates back to the agronomics. Improper application practices, we're going to address that today. Weather events, you can't do anything about those, but if you know they're coming, you certainly can avoid contributing to them as being a factor. And then field conditions we'll all address a little bit. So when we talk about nutrient management, there's 4 general broad principles that we kind of look at using there, and they relate back to what we just talked about. You've got manure application, the right placement, meaning you're not next to the ditch in October. That you have some kind of a setback, or you know you've got this big swale and it's going to start running soon, so you fence your cattle out of there, or you apply differently, whatever that may be. If you're on a berry row or something else, you've applied real tight on those rows and you've got some way to keep it around. The timing, this one's critical. I'm going to talk about this a lot in the next few slides, so I'll just say, just put it out at the right time. Don't put it out ahead of a rainstorm. Not right before flooding or anything else. Timing's pretty easy. The right rate, Andy talked a little bit about that, figuring out how much do I need to put out at what time of year. There's a lot of publications out there to assist with that, and that's something that hopefully you can get some assistance or chat with someone, one of your planners can help you with that. And then the right source, solid versus liquid. In your brain, when you put that out, do you think there's a difference there? And if so, in your brain, what are you thinking is that difference? And then I'm going to tell you there's no difference. And it's a lot of essence, because it still has nutrients, it still has a sediment value, and there's still pathogens in there. So whether it's solid or liquid, everything I say here forward is the same. So those 2 products have a different nutrient value and everything else. You can apply them at different rates, but they both have the same degree of pollution potential to them. So I want you to kind of treat them the same from here forward. What I'm going to talk about today, Application Risk Management, or ARM, as the acronym for short. This is a program that we've been developing for the last 4 or 5 years. We've got a lot of field evaluations behind it. We've got a lot of farmer testing behind it. We've got a lot of knowledge and science and all sorts of other good stuff behind it. And we've made it as simple as possible, and I'm going to show you the 3–4 things that it encompasses. But it mostly focuses on that right time and right placement, because these are the 2 factors that are going to help you the most of avoiding a runoff and or leaching event. So keeping manure on your field and out of the ditch or out of the groundwater. So when you want to apply manure, no matter what type of farm, you have a few things you're going to do. Number 1 is calculate the agronomic rate. How much do you actually need out there? Let's keep that pollutant availability part right to the niche. And it's not a pollutant if you put it on right? It's not a waste product. It's a valuable nutrient. Next, you're going to identify what field you should be going out to. It's going to change throughout the year. That field that you have is not necessarily viable all year round for manure application. Your heavy clay-based soils, very different than sandy soils. We're going to apply at different times. I'll show you a little bit more of that. Determine when to apply. That's looking at the forecast and understanding, is today better, or is, a few days from now better? Assessing your field conditions. Can your field deal with that application right now, or do you need to find a different one or wait a little bit? And then, of course, applying and monitoring your field. So these 3 things in the middle are the most important for, again, avoiding that pollution event. And we've got a few tools that we've developed. I'm going to go over here quickly and individually to show you this, from field risk assessment maps, so identifying those fields, from having seasonal application setbacks, a real-time manure spreading advisory for determining when to apply, and then assessing your field conditions. We've got a field level risk evaluation worksheet that you can conduct before you even go out there. So number one, identifying low-risk fields. And this is just an example map of a farm that shows that this farm has a variety of fields, red being high risk, blue being low risk, and this is for runoff. So this is your, quote, risk rating October through June. And you can have some fields that are all pretty low risk, except you've got this like little swale in the middle that always runs off somewhere. You've got this strange low spot. Or vice versa, it's a relatively high risk, but it kind of slopes up and there's this historical sandy zone, whatever it may be. Fields are extremely variable, and you already know this stuff. For us to map it for you is just confirming or putting down what you already intimately know about your field, and then helping you appropriately address those spots. So these field risk rating maps just really kind of help plan out. Okay, if you want to apply in October or you want to apply in January or June, which is your best field? In June, they're kind of all the same, right? So we also have a leaching risk rating. So historically, we've just thought about runoff, right? That's what everyone talks about. It's a big concern. But there's more concern now, and starting with what you heard about lagoons, your fields can have a much higher leaching risk than your lagoon by far, like orders of magnitude, if what we do on the surface isn't kind of working. I'm going to show you a great example of that. But the point being that your runoff and your leaching risk tend to be opposites. So when one is high, the other is low, and vice versa. And let me show you a little graph about why that happens or how that looks. So this is a really general example of this, but we've got the year. So here's January all the way through December. And we've got a generic crop growth. So let's just say this is grass, this could be berries, this could be corn, whatever it may be. And you know, we kind of start around this time of year and forward. Your grass starts growing, or you plant your corn, and it's going to start going. And then around September, October, either you've harvested and or you're just starting to get a decrease in growth. Your crop is going dormant, or it's done for the year, it's been taken off, whatever it may be. We've got all of this nutrient uptake need, right? Growing, I need energy, I need food, I need those nutrients, and then that really decreases. It doesn't go to zero, but it very much decreases. Zero, obviously, if your corn comes off. If we apply manure, for instance, that nutrient availability, there's a gap. So when you put it on, manure can take anywhere from weeks to months to become plant available. So if you think about your manure is composed of organic nitrogen and ammonium nitrogen, and the soil turns it into nitrate, which is what your plants want. Some plants like blueberries, not so much, but those, for the most part, the plants want nitrate. Takes a little while for manure to do that. If the soil's really cold, those microbes aren't moving very fast, that conversion isn't happening. It's kind of like when you wake up in the morning, you know, you're kind of just like moving along, getting going. You have a cup of coffee, that starts waking up, the soil warms up, those microbes get moving, you get more productive, right, as your day goes on. So manure is kind of doing that same thing until whoop, everything's available, and then it starts humming along. And those two things are going to match up for quite a while. You're either putting it on once it's available till it's gone, or you keep putting it on and recharging that rate, and those things are going to match up. Your crop growth and needs are matching up. But then at some point, it happens. Even though you stopped, you still have all that conversion, and like Andy showed in that graph, manure is still going. You know, you can still be getting some input. And eventually that will start to decrease, but in the meantime you have this excess nutrient. You have this extra. And you can really try to match this up, and you can get pretty darn close. And that's what your fall nitrate is showing is, you know, let's say, you know, one year this is 40 something, you know, you can buy yourself a beer. Well, let's say the next year you got this down, it's just this little teeny window, it's like 5 or it's 10, you're gonna go buy yourself a beer and say, I did it, that was a great year. So it's this gap that we're trying to avoid. And why? Because when we have that gap, and this is our precipitation curve, we don't get much rain in the summer. We get a lot of rain, September or October, November, as you know, and that's year to year, but in general, we get a ton of rain. And then we get a lot of rain around this time of year, kind of ebbs and flows. We get a little dip, comes back March, April. And this time, the September, October, November, this is our highest leaching time. This is when we worry about our soils losing it. And it's on those really well-drained soils, the sandy soils. That's because we have that excess. So whatever's left over, this is why your fall nitrate test matters. Whatever's left over at the end of the year, it's gone by spring. I mean, very little of that retains. We get so much rain and our soils are so mobile that it just takes that nitrate and zips it right through. So that's why we're really concerned about that. And that's typically why these late season applications on sandy-based soils are not helpful. Not only are you getting it out there at a time when your crop doesn't need very much, but the conversion rate, our soils are still warm and it's still happening. So that's why we get that excess. On your clay-based soils, not so much. That discrepancy is a lot less. And applying through October is okay. It's a little bit different. But then in the early season, this is when we're the most concerned, our highest runoff risk. You can have runoff all year round. You can have some rate of leaching year round, but this is when we're the most concerned about runoff. Why? Because our soils are saturated by about this time. And we're getting out and kind of risky between the rain, between here and there, getting a little manure on, and it's able, to get off of those soils a lot easier. So that's why the maps that I show, we're thinking about runoff, we're thinking about leaching at different times of the year. Feels a little confusing, but it's actually a little bit easier to manage than you think when we talk about soil types. And doing the whole risk analysis, sitting down with a planner and going through this, you kind of catch on pretty darn quick once you say these soils this and this soils that. And that's why we create those maps to help you figure this out pretty easily. So in a nutshell, yeah, right, that's kind of how that works. A little confusing. But so let's talk about how in the world, how do you take all that and actually determine when to apply? How can you make this a little bit easier? This is not making anything easy except to say, this is our precipitation for the Linden area, again, January through December. And I just want to show you on an annual basis, it varies a lot, absolutely. This year is different than last year than the year before. In the last handful of years, nothing has been average, right? You're like, oh, average rainfall. I can't remember one month that felt average. It's so variable, which makes your job really hard, and I have a lot of empathy for that. But we can get a trend. We can get kind of that, all right, we know we get a lot of rain here, we don't get much rain here, and we can work within that. And we took that, and we did a real-time manure spreading advisory to help you right now figure out, is this a problem? Like, I don't have time to pull up all this graphs and make all this information. Can I go out now? Or can I go out in the next few days? That's what you want to know. And so we spent a lot of time creating a map that's going to help you do that. And before I even get going, who has seen this map? The Manure Spreading Advisory. Who's seen this? Who's actually used it for farming purposes? Thank you for keeping your hands up. So I want, next time I see it like this, next year, I want everyone to say, absolutely, I used that Manure Spreading Advisory and it was helpful. So that's what my goal is. The point being, you're going to go to the site and on these little cards here, WA Dairy Plan, WashingtonDairyPlan.org is where you can find that site, and or you can get it right from the Whatcom Conservation District's webpage. And we'll pull it up live and go through it together here in a minute, but you can get that. There's also, click here if you're accessing from a mobile device. You can do this on your phone. So you can bookmark this. If you don't know how to do that, I will make an icon on your home screen for you. Just take me a second. So that you can access this anytime. So you're going to kind of zoom in relatively to where your farm is. You're going to click on that area. So that's where Nichole's farm is, let's say. And it's going to pop up some information. And I pulled this up yesterday, so it's high risk, not surprisingly. But what it's going to give you is the date, 24-hour prediction for the forecast for precipitation, and the 72-hour forecast for prediction for precipitation. Two things that are nice about that. You heard earlier in your record keeping, these are the things I want you to write down. You can print this off, you can write this down. We're gonna go through the next step together that records that for you. But the point being that these two values help you in a variety of ways. It's giving you the daily risk saying, this is high, and it is. Yeah, like now is not the time. But what you might see in the future when you pull this up one day is somebody high, high, and then low. This gives you an opportunity to say, I can call my custom guy and get him out on Wednesday. If that's the day, whatever it is. It gives you that opportunity, or it gives you on your farm, if you have your own equipment, to kind of get things together. Or if you've been sitting on a pile of solids and just waiting to get that out on your crop, this is going to help you pick that right day. Another thing is that it doesn't always just take 24 hours to get your field done. Sometimes it can take a couple days. So this is going to let you know, do you have a couple days if you apply today, or do you only have 1 day or 2 days? And maybe that helps you choose what field to go out to. So there's a couple different ways you can use this information. 2 links on here that I want to show. One is if you click this NOAA Weather link. You saw Michael put this up earlier. This is probably the coolest forecast you're going to find. And I spent about 4 years pulling up all of the weather kind of sites that give you precipitation and recording that every day and then comparing that to real rain, what actually happened. And this is by far the most accurate and the best one. So I'm just presenting the one that's going to work. But look, I mean, first of all, yes, there's a lot of information here, but once you sit down and you look at what's there, it's pretty cool. Number one, you've got precipitation, 6-hour increments on any one day, which is great. But you've also got wind. Again, if you're going to use a big gun or something else for application, this might be a nice one to see, like, ooh, it's going to be windy tomorrow, but looks like it's going to die down. If the forecast is looking good, maybe that helps you choose when to apply. Then it gives you temperatures, it gives you, so you know if a frost is coming or something like that, it's going to be able to give you that information, etc. So there's a lot, if it's going to snow, etc. So it gives you some nice tools for farming in general. Just a peek at this in the morning. And again, very easy to find it for your zone. So it's based on this whole modeling field mapping system, but this is the easiest way to find it and to go for it. It's hard to find if you just try to Google it, trust me. So try to make that easy for you to find that. Another thing that I want to go over that relates to this kind of weather bit, etc. So now we've kind of helped you. First line of defense, is the weather okay for today? You know, what's my risk, yay or nay? And then the next is, okay, if it says yay, about this time of year, how far should I be back from a high-risk area, from a water body or whatever it may be that's identified on your map? What you're going to find in the capital permit, or what's been pushed by other agencies, is 100 foot all year round, which is kind of ridiculous. So in June, July, why would you be 100 feet back? So you're wasting a good chunk of land that could really use some nutrients, applied appropriately, of course, using these tools, but nonetheless, you can get maximum crop uptake. So in the summertime, say 10 feet. If you're doing a great job and very responsible, you can be there. But as we kind of get into those shoulder seasons, September, we can get a lot of rain. It can also be gorgeous. But October, we know we're going to get a lot of rain. And if you've still got that manure on the outskirts, you may have some issues. So we say, all right, let's bump that up to 40 feet. You're maybe going to get 1 or so applications in that time period. And you've already had a lot of nutrients out there, so you're not having a detriment to crop growth. And we've looked at this. We're going to ask for the same thing coming into the summer, so that we've got that 40 feet, March, April, May. And then when we bump up to our highest times, it's really rainy months, as you know, October through the end of February, we're asking for 80 feet. You may have 1 applications period, and it's good to be that far back. It's your insurance policy, if you will. So you've got that extra measure of care, even though you're applying at the right rate, the right time. We've got a little bit of a buffer, and with some rain, you may have transference of some of that manure into that zone, but it's not going to reach a ditch or some other water body that we're concerned about. So having this variable setback, this dynamic nature to that manure application setbacks, we found so far is working pretty good. And we're actually, another part of what I do is all of our research. So testing this stuff. Does it work? You know, are these conservation practices good? Are the ones we suggesting great? So we're going to actually be testing this from here forward on some farms to really see how well is this working, not only for your benefit, but also to prevent kind of egregious setbacks, etc. as needed. So this is your next thought. What time of year is it? And how do I use that? And then the next part We've assessed, yep, the weather's pretty good. I know what my setback distance should be, but is my field really capable of this? And two things happen there. When we look at the manure spreading advisory, it can be high, but you may have a low risk field. So rarely does that happen. It's usually when this is medium or medium high, you may have a low risk field that you can still get out to and you're fine. There's no ditches around it. It's a really well drained soil. It's a lovely field. Great. So, but if we just went on this, you wouldn't be able to do that. And vice versa. The manure spreading advisory may be really low. Let's say in December, yeah, sure, we get some low days. But if you assessed your field, it's frozen, it's saturated, something else is happening out there. You don't want to be out there. So this works both ways. Again, that's why you check this first. It's an easy visual check. And then the next steps, we're going to go back. I clicked on Nichole's farm, for instance, and now we click Field Risk Assessment. And I want to do this actually live so that you guys can see what that looks like. We'll go through this together. And I'm going to access it from the Washington Dairy Plan website, but you could access it if you were on our website. If you're not a dairy and you didn't want to see all the other stuff on the other site, there's a link right here that says Manure Spreading Advisory. So it's down here, same place to access it. So we're back to Washington Dairy Plan. And we're going to click on Manure Spreading Advisory. And it's going to pull up that map again. So you could follow along on your phones if you really wanted to. And I'm going to zoom in until I get to my farm, approximately. We're just going to pull that back down. Okay, and let's say I'm just north of Linden here. Say my farm's right there. So I click on there and it's going to pull up that 24-hour, 72-hour forecast. Obviously, if I pulled this up today, I'd say, whoops, never mind. I'll wait a little while, but we're going to go through this anyway. So now I'm going to click on Field Risk Assessment. And this is going to pull up a worksheet that I'm going to go through for that field by field risk assessment. So I'm going to go through each of these values with you so that when you fill this out, you'll know how to do it and find it's pretty easy. So I'm going to put in what's my farm name, and it's Nichole's Farm. We now have this county in here, so this is a new feature if you haven't seen that before, and that's because we've got some other regions using it. Application date, again, you don't want to do this more than 24 hours in advance. If you do this for, let's say today's Wednesday, and you do this for Saturday, way too much changes in the forecast between then and now, even in your field conditions. So you want to do this the day before or the morning of at the very best. So field name, I'm just going to say that's field 1. And what's going to happen here is if you try to do this today and you're supposed to get 3/4 of an inch of rain, almost, it's going to override and it's just going to say don't even bother. So same with these, but I'm going to manually change this, assuming that, let's say we're just having a little bit of rain and maybe no rain in 72 hours coming. So as you notice, as I go through, it's giving me some feedback. So it's telling me which of these are high, which of these are low. So let's say, and by the way, at the very end of this, it's going to give us an overall risk rating for that field. You get to you've gone through this, you get to the very bottom and it's medium, high, and you're like, what, how? You go back through and figure out which of those parameters popped you over the top on those. So the next one I'm going to enter is soil type. And this matters for what we were just talking about earlier. Certain times of the year, sand versus silt versus clay makes a big difference. So if you said, I have a sandy soil at 85–90% moisture, not a big deal. That's probably going to drain out. If you have a clay soil at that, ooh, you have very little wiggle room if you put something on top of that for that to absorb into the soil. So this matters. And where can you find this information? I'm glad you asked. It's on your dairy farm maps. So if you're not a dairy and you want to know this information, at the district we can produce those maps for you free and relatively quickly for your fields, and it shows you all of those different soil types on there so you know which field is which. So I'm going to say I've got a silt-based soil type, And soil moisture, again, this one's pretty important as we were just talking about. It's also kind of hard to determine this. If you were an excellent A+ student, you would go out there, you'd walk out on your field, and you'd take a handful of it, and you'd have your chart next to you, and you'd say, oh, that feels like X, and it matches here, oh, that's 80% moisture, or it's 60% moisture, etc. But let's be honest and say, here's two ways to figure it out pretty easily. If you walk out in your field and you hear squish, squish, it's probably 90% or more, and you shouldn't be out there. You're going to compact your field, probably have a runoff event, it's a mess. If you are comfortable driving a tractor out there without ruining your field, you're probably at 70% and you're good to go. So those are two easy-ish ways to determine that. If you're thinking like, I think I'm going to pull a big gun, it's a little wet, I'm a little worried about it, you're probably somewhere in the middle there, and you're kind of, just be careful, right? Just be on that bubble. You're right in that 80 to 90%. So let's do that. If you're somewhere at 95 to 100%, if you put that in, let's say, it's going to tell you, do not go out there. You're almost guaranteed, unless you have a 1,000-foot setback, you're almost guaranteed to have a runoff event. So just let's find another field or another way to do this. So there are some overrides in here for those things. And water table depth. This one, the reason that we ask this one is if you're within 2 feet of the top with your water table, number one, tiles are probably running pretty high, pretty heavy, and/or there's not a lot of capacity for manure, applied liquid manure particularly, applied on the surface to get into the soil. There's all this kind of hydrologic properties and tension that's happening and all this other kind of fancy soil stuff that's occurring in there. But just think about, if you have a sponge in your sink and it's mostly saturated and you put a little bit more water on there, it's going to start running off. It's not going to be able to keep soaking that up. So same thing here. If you're saturating that from the bottom and you've got water within a foot, don't go out there. You want that at least 2 feet or below. And you can figure this out typically by a ditch nearby. You can go out the first time and dig a hole. You don't hit water by 2 feet. You can kind of gauge that on something visually nearby. You know the river is this, or you can see it out there. You've got ponded areas or whatnot. You know the level of that field. There's a variety of ways you can quickly visually do that if you don't already know it. So let's say in this case, we're 36 inches down. We're pretty safe. The next one is forage density, and this is an important one to ask about. So if you have a cornfield that you're applying to and you're injecting, that's all right. So you're going to be incorporating that in, and that stuff's not going to be going anywhere. You just want to think about those setbacks on that cornfield. But if you've got a forage field and you want to apply, let's say right around this time of year or coming up here soon, if you've got a nice thick stand of grass, 90 to 100% density, it's nice and thick, it looks really good, and you apply manure on there and then you get water through, all of those blades of grass, as the water moves, it's going to keep stopping it. And it's going to hold all that sediment, it's going to encourage more infiltration. If you've got patchy grass, you have a field that you probably should have rotated out last year, or you have all these dead spots, or you had a bunch of you didn't get a last cutting off last year, now you've got compacted chunks of grass, you're going to have way more probability of water zipping right through there. So there's nothing stopping it. It's like running through a room with 5 people or running through a room with 500 people. It's a lot harder with 500 people to move and get around and forget about it. It's going to take me forever to get over there. Otherwise, you're just zipping through. So think of your forage density in the same way that we've got that nice thick stand. That's a great help for you. If you don't, you may want to think about really paying attention to those setbacks, or maybe applying at a little bit lower rate. So something to consider. So let's say we're at 80 to 90. It's a pretty decent field. Height is the same thing, by the way. If you have AstroTurf, if you have mowed your grass down to a putting green, the water is going to just zip right off of there. Or if you have a fallow field, that water is going to zip right off of there. Same idea. So if you've got at least 3 inches of grass or more, again, it's going to be tall enough and thick enough to stand up as water hits it. If it's really short, it's not going to be able to do that. It's just going to fall over as water goes through it. So let's say we're at about 4 inches this time of year. Not bad. And now here is kind of the idiot proofing, if you will. So we're asking about field surface condition. If you have ponding, that could be okay, by the way. So this time of year, again, you may have that just great, you know, that low spot where your brother went out and applied manure last year and got stuck, or you crawled in, oh, we have this low spot here, or whatever it is. Or you've got a low spot just because that's how your field is. It's kind of roly-poly. If that ponded area doesn't go anywhere, that's okay. So you can apply, just don't apply through it, apply around it. But if you've got that low spot, or that ponded spot that then runs through a swale into the ditch nearby, or you've decided to de-ditch it, then that we're going to consider a water body. You want to apply your setback distance around that ponded area if that ponded area is going. So your ponding may be okay, maybe not. You're going to address that in two different ways, which is why we say, it's medium. So just pay attention to that. If you have flooding or frozen ground, if you check either of those, it's going to say no-go. This is pretty obvious. That means that the potential for runoff to occur for losses is extremely high. So we don't want those. Do you have tiles present in your field? This is okay, but again, watch them. So if you've got big pore spaces down to those, let's say another reason we're concerned about the fall in application is that you've had relatively dry soils throughout the summer, particularly if you don't irrigate. Your soil, and this year was a real obvious year for that, your soils get really dry and they create cracks, so there's just larger pores in there from worms and from roots and anything else. And so water, as it starts to come, your soil is still pretty dry and pretty tight, and so water is going to shoot through all those pore spaces right down to tiles or your groundwater. As the soil starts saturating, as it gets a little wetter, that stuff kind of swells and it gets harder for water to leach down through the soil. So that's why our leaching is so important, or that's why it's such a bigger problem in the fall than at other times of the year. But again, that's when our tiles, when they start running, that from surface to tile, that connection can be a lot shorter. So that's why you're just thinking about it. Or maybe you have none of the above. Just a couple more here, and trust me, when you do this by yourself, it only takes 5 minutes because you don't have to hear me. Hopefully in your brain you hear me talking about it. You don't have to hear it. Manure application equipment. So this is really only important because if you're going to apply with a big gun, then it's just going to tell you, that's fine, but please be considerate of wind speed. Please be considerate of staying minimum. So when we talk about that 10-foot setback, by the way, that's not where your big gun ends. Big guns always have to be the end of that spray about 30 feet or more back because of drift. So you're going to hit the rest of that most likely. When you apply the big gun, things are a little bit different. So be considerate of those. Or if you've got a surface aerator below surface applicator, your risk is a lot lower because you're getting that right down. If you're incorporating this as soon as you possibly can, let's say, so you've got solid manures that you put out onto your field and you want to apply those, or you want to incorporate that in. If you kind of get them out there and then you're right out there not long after, great. But if you're the type of guy who likes to put it out there and just store it in your field, that's, if you're too close to a ditch, that stuff is still going to run. It may seem like, it's just bedding, it's just this and that, but there's still nutrients, there's still pathogens, there's still all sorts of stuff in there. So you want to be considerate of that, where you put that. And then the last one, do you have a water body or critical area nearby? If no, great. If yes, I just want to verify that you know what is that manure application setback distance. So right now, if you try to fool and put in 40, it's going to say no, it's not. So you're either going to have to guess until it's right, or hopefully you just looked at the table. It's 80 feet right now. Great. And then lastly, do you have some kind of buffer? And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what does buffer mean. This is some kind of vegetated area in a cornfield. Maybe you have nothing. Maybe you decided you worked with NRCS and planted a vegetated filter strip around your field, so you never had to worry about how close am I, yada yada. You're like, I always know I can go right to the edge because I've got this vegetated area as my insurance policy, if you will. So I've got that. Certain times of year I may go back and forth. Your grass field kind of acts as that buffer around there. So your grass is the buffer as long as you're using those setback distances. You're kind of using that like a vegetated treatment area. So if you've ever heard about the filter strips or anything else, your grass field acts as that. If you've got a different type of crop farm, You can either do a cover crop around the outskirts of your field so you're not losing all of that sediment. We would love a cover crop on the whole field is the most optimal so you don't get any surface movement of soil or loss off of there. But if you've got berries, for those folks here, planting those in-row cover crops is a great way to prevent the loss of nutrients and other things. Cover crops too, by the way, since I'm briefly chatting on those, is not only are we worried about surface losses and transport that way, but it's really about the nutrient loss. So as was mentioned in Andy's talk, when you harvest your corn, whatever is left is just left. There's nothing to take it up. It wants to leave, it's hanging out, anything's going to move it around. And or if you take your grass out, you rip it out at the end of the season, the beginning, and you're either going to put corn or another strand of grass. For that interim period, your leaching loss rate can be very high. So you've got all this stuff converting, but nothing taking it up. So that's why we encourage cover crops after corn, so that whatever your excess fall nitrate is, that cover crop's going to zip it all up because it's growing and it wants to really work on there. Hopefully, even better, you've planted and interseeded a relay crop so that it's getting started that whole time. So when you take it off, it's not killing it off. But that you've got something on there, or your next stand of grass goes in right away. A fall planting is probably best for that to make sure that it gets going. So we've gone through this worksheet, and in this case, our field said it's medium risk for the little bit of rainfall on there. And you say, okay, medium risk. That means that you're somewhere in the middle, right? If this said low risk, you're like, great, I'm feeling good, I'm good to go. If it said high risk, maybe you should start thinking about something else or look at a different field. Medium risk, you're somewhere in the middle, and I can go back through and say, okay, what wasn't I doing? What made this high? If I change this or that, how can that affect things? And don't go back and change your soil moisture. If you go, oh, I dropped that, it looks good. No, be honest about it. Otherwise, don't bother. It's not going to work if you're not using this to actually assist yourself in not having an issue. So honesty is to your best benefit working through something like this than anything else. And as we went through, by the way, let's say you were, you go to do this and you're like, oh man, what was that girl talking about with soil moisture? I can't remember. So there's always a little note here, and this one says click here, and it's going to take you to soil moisture determination and give you a lot of yada yada on how to figure that out. Hopefully you just have to read that once, or maybe use it as a reference here and there, and you can remember this stuff. But in general, that worksheet, trust me, once you do it once or twice, it's only going to take about 5 minutes. One nice thing, by the way, at the top, I have field number. If you want to apply to like 10 of your fields, and you're like, I don't want to do this for every field. If they're all the same crop and soil type and relative kind of dangers, if you will, for setbacks, etc., you can group those as a unit, a management unit. So your fields, like on maps, will be able to do that for you. Say, oh, these can all qualify together in these. And really doing this, the high times you really want to do this are October through about March. In June, you don't need to do this per se. Your fields are probably pretty good. But looking at that manure spreading advisory, absolutely to your benefit, because we get those 1-inch crazy storms. And if you're not paying attention to that, or you're up to like, ooh, it's going to rain, I'm going to get out there. Let's change that right now. If it's going to rain, be like, oh, I will take an extra day to go get this stuff done, and I'll get out after that rain happens. So changing that in your mental cycle is pretty important too. So, what if that manure spreading advisory and that worksheet said the risk is high, but you still want to apply? What's the first thing that happens here? If the risk is high, don't apply. So if everything says high, just don't do it. So I've had producers do it anyway and had a discharge and had some issues. So if it's high, if the MSA is high, manure spreading advisory is high, that individual risk rating is high, let's do something else. You're either going to find a low-risk field to apply to, look at a different field. You can transfer manure to another lagoon if you have that option, whether that's yours or you've worked with a neighbor or an adjoining different type of crop farm that's got a lagoon that you can pump some over to. Great, take off the pressure if you need to do that. This time of year, and I think in about a month, a lot of people are going to start twitching and getting a little nervous, and oh, the lagoon's coming up, and the weather won't stop, and you're going to get a little nervous about that stuff coming up here soon. I get that. But that's the difference between nutrient management and waste management. You just stick it out there to get it out there. So hopefully you've done all your clean water management to limit having that problem in the first place. And you've got these other options, hopefully. And really, if you've got this map and you understand, oh, I've got 40 acres of low risk, fields, those are ones I can get out to early. That's great. So I can maybe not worry so much here and like pushing that October 31st date, which, as you know, is also quite a gamble. A couple of years ago, a lot of people gambled and lost on that one, which was really unfortunate. But it's more about, and you've been doing this for so long, that it's ingrained in you on some of these behaviors about, okay, I'm not allowed to apply after the 31st. I can't apply until February 15th. And if it's going to rain, I should get out there before in case it never stops raining again. Well, this system hopefully gets rid of those thought processes, and instead you're going to apply when the weather is right for that field. And that can be January. We're now working with a lot of folks, of course not this January, this is the one January, that has defied me in 8 years. It's driving me crazy. We had a very short window early January. But there's always this wonderful window. And application to forages, this time of year, we did a lot of work with some farmers, about 4 years of forage collection, and we found it's incredible for a boost in your production. So we were getting, I think, like 25 to 40% greater yields on your first 2 cuttings by being able to get out here earlier. And if you think about why that may be, so think about earlier to your manure conversion versus crop growth. So when your crop is starting like, it's warming up in March, it takes forever to warm up around here, but it's really happens. But then you finally get manure out in February, and those things aren't matching up. So by the time your crop is just hungry and going, your manure is just kind of catching up, and there's a lag. So if you can get that manure out there earlier, you've got this beautiful couple of growth rate and nutrient availability that just marries right up. And so that first cutting or so is going to be a lot greater. But on those soils, those are your low risk ones, those are your sandy soils, those are your well drained soils. So are those the ones that you want to be out in October? Nope. So there's also a bit of a shift there. So we're kind of looking at how do we shift your manure application from a January through September-ish on those well-drained soils. Those other ones that you can't get out to until March, April, some of June, those are the ones that you're going to be applying to later because you're not going to get that leaching-based movement. So we do have changes. So this is something else to think about, having this custom manure application strategy for each one of your farms and your field. Just because John starts applying does not mean you can start applying. So that's another thing to consider, like, oh, he's got stuff out there. Oh, okay, I guess I should. No, you're going to do the evaluation and have a plan for your individual farm so that you're utilizing your manure as an amazing nutrient product and not a waste product. And you'll get used to it pretty fast if you're not used to it already. And I am going to make a note. This is not in any way an alternative to manure storage. Don't think that, oh, Nicole's going to let me apply out in January because I don't have to worry about my storage again. I'm not going to fix that gutter. No, it has nothing to do with that. Because I'm asking you on those 40 acres you may get out to early, you're not getting out to it in October. So there is a change there. You still have to manage your storage appropriately. You still have to make sure that you're solid there, that you're doing clean water management and all that jazz to make sure that things are matching up. So this is, this application risk management is mostly to ensure that you're not having loss of manure off your fields or off your farm. And it's about utilizing it in the best way to maximize crop growth and crop yields and maximize uptake and use of it. That's what we're looking at with this whole system. So if you actually want to do this, if you're not already signed up for this, if you don't already have the tools, if you do, by the way, now's the time to start using them. I would love to see that. But you can also just contact your planner at the district, whether that's myself, Chris, Chuck, Karina, etc., small farm, dairy, berry, whatever you are, having your farm plan updated to include the tools for this and the info for it, and just sitting down with you. It's really about coming out with your map, chatting about it, you know, you saying, oh, I've got this field and this, sometimes this is an issue, wonderful, we'll document that, but really, here's how you do this, here's your schedule for your farm, for your field, let's give it a go. And it's a leap of faith sometimes to change from, you know, that, oh, I have to get everything out in October, I get so nervous about it. It's a leap of faith your first year, and I always tell people if you're really nervous about it, just do these fields and see how this goes, and let's get more fields on next year, and so on and so forth. So there's ways to get it going. For those, by the way, who, you don't want to come in and get maps and whatever, or maybe it's going to take 5 months before someone can get to me, you can start using these tools right now. So you can, on your phone, you get back in, look at that spreading advisory, and I trust that every one of you can go through that worksheet, no problem, and do that assessment. At minimum, the spreading advisory is going to help you a ton, just looking at that and say, oh, I got 24 hours, 72 hours, inspector told me to write this stuff down anyway. It's a great place to get it, so I don't have to add up precip, and do I use Farm West, or do I use NOAA, or do I use this? It's all here. You at least have that part of that tool ready to go for you. And so a handful of other things, I've talked about these, so I'm going to zip through. What else can you do to minimize risk besides just using these tools, which is one of your best ways to do it. For liquid manure in particular, your soil test, that fall nitrate test, is going to tell you you need manure at the end of the year. And at the beginning of the year, that nitrate number is 0. It's gone, that stuff rains out. So you do in the beginning. But throughout that year, how much do you need? Does your manure, in the beginning of the year, you have 5 pounds per 1,000 gallons of nitrogen there, and then in the summer, you're 18 or 20. You're not going to apply at the same rate at those 2 times a year. It's going to be different. So adjust your application rate. Don't just say, oh, the guy comes out, he puts on 8,000 gallons every time for 6 times, and I'm good to go. Not necessarily. Do a calculation real quick. Figure it out. So we're going to, I'm in the process of creating an Excel spreadsheet for folks to be able to actually help you do that calculation where you put in, here's my manure test, here's how many cuttings I get, or my corn yield, and it's going to say, okay, put out, this is 60-pound application, this is a 40, you get so many of those, it's going to be this rate. So hopefully we've got something like that coming for you guys soon to look at that. Injection or aeration or incorporation, obviously best in the higher season. Any way to get the manure into the soil faster so it's not on top, that one's pretty obvious. Observing the forecast, watching for swales and slopes to waterways. These things will hit you up if you're not really like, it's fine, I'll just go through there. You get a rain and it all goes into that slope and right out the middle, that's going to be a problem. And then follow that setback guidance. When we talk about solids, it's pretty much, all the same guidance with a couple extra pieces. Obviously, you're still observing the same setback distances, same deal. Incorporate when you can. If you are going to pile in the field, which isn't the best practice because that stuff still leaches, it's converting, can still run off, but make big piles and make them in the middle. So I'm not necessarily encouraging this behavior, but if you do it anyway, that's the best way to do it. Don't store floodplains within 100 feet of a water body just because you get cumulative leaching out and out and out. You're like, oh, my pile's 100 feet. Yeah, but it actually, the nutrient value off of that will spread over time. So 500 feet in wells, that's a rule, law requirement. Not on a slope to a water body, not near your neighbors if it's going to bother them. If it's another dairy, fine. And not on well-drained soils. Don't store the stuff on a sandy soil because it's just, you're losing it. It's going. So number one, again, it's a waste. You're losing all that great nutrient product. But number two, you're having that contribution to that high wells. As Chris kind of showed those graphs, you can look near you and see what your groundwater levels are and see how that's looking. Plant relay cover crops, I already mentioned this. This is for reduction of runoff and sediment, whether that's in-row crops, whether that's on your corn crop. This year was a perfect year for cover crops. Man, have they flourished this year. We didn't get any terrible weather that killed them out. I know they're kind of hard to harvest. There are ways to do it. I was surprised, again, up in Canada this week, that they actually go through and plant them. You go back through and they till it up and they cultivate it, they get it ready, and then they put that cover crop because they love having that extra cutting forage every year. So they're really into that, putting the extra mile onto their fields. They're okay with that. Yes, it's fodder for swans, but hey, dairy farm fields provide waterfowl habitat. Nice work, everyone. So I understand there's reasons why and there's reasons why not, but in general, it's a great practice for you for reducing soil loss and reducing nutrient loss off your field. The vegetated stream buffers, you can do a handful of stuff. If you have grass, great. You can plant a dedicated filter strip in there. Hedgerows is another nice one. Doing, you know, short, skinny forests or whatnot. That you plant those, and you never have to worry about drift, and you've got all this extra wonderful habitat. Mostly that's for drainage. If you have a ditch or something that you're constantly mowing out or spraying, or you have to call, and the district's got to do it, whatever it is, planting these will absolutely reduce that. And it's probably that swath of field that you're not on anyway. It's a drive area or whatever it may be. And Frank Corey in our office really is great to talk to you about that. In our Dairy Speaker Series, which is the third Thursday of the month, this coming month in February, we've got a talk on hedgerows and the benefit of those. So it's great to come, listen, see if you've got that. You shake your fist at that darn area that you're constantly doing drainage maintenance, or your neighbor is, or you've got beavers, it's driving me nuts. Check it out. It might be something that's helpful. So lastly, I want you to have a little bit of a reflection moment. You can close your eyes if you want. Actually, don't. You'll fall asleep. So we're almost done. So none of that. But now that you've heard today all of our speakers, and or this talk maybe in particular, in hindsight, what would you have done differently last year? Think about your whole year, January through December, and how things went on your farm, how your crop production was. Did you have a little discharge? You know, could you have worked a little bit better with your custom pumper? Or could you have collaborated a little bit better with a neighbor on manure use? Did you transfer out too much? Did you have access? How did your lagoon levels go last year? So thinking about all of that, what are you going to do different this year? It's January. You know, things haven't really started full bore on your crop fields yet. You have a great time period right now to plan ahead. Think about, all right, you know, what's my custom manure application schedule look like this year? What crops am I going to put on what fields, and are those high risk or low risk? When can I get out on those? What are some areas of my farm that maybe I planted my corn right up to the ditch, and it, you know, you have that row that slopes in there. You all know what I'm talking about. Don't do that. So try not to, maybe just, you know, get that back up so you're not sloughing all that sediment into the ditch and having issues with that, you're losing it. So again, what happens a lot of times, whether you're a beef, a berry, you're a dairy, potatoes, whatever it may be, sometimes you do stuff, you're like, oh, it's just me, it's just a little bit. But if you've got, you know, 100+ dairy farmers, and you've got thousands of small farmers, and you've got, you know, thousands of acres and berries that are doing that, it cumulatively makes a big difference. And as an industry right now, especially the dairy folks, I think you all know that the greater you can do for your industry, the greater you can do on your farm personally to be a positive example, or just to utilize some of these things, just to give it a go, is going to make all the difference in the world right now. And this ARM tool and this system, for those who are aware of this, is something that's being asked and encouraged. It's not a regulatory tool, but it is being asked and encouraged by the LUMI and or by your dairy industry, the Dairy Federation in particular, to use that tool to say, hey guys, how about we all voluntarily, proactively use something like this and see if we can all collectively make a big difference. And for your industry to show these are all the things we're doing, to be able, that worksheet we went through, by the way, after you're done with it at the end, print it out. That's your records. You've done your due diligence for your record keeping. So that's props on you. Or if you have your community member come by, whatever it is, and you just want to say, look at all the great stuff we're doing. You know, sometimes the little things help. So sorry, that's my soapbox moment. But just in this reflection period, you can just consider those things and think about, well, you get a fresh start this year, and what do you want to do a little bit differently, thinking about all this stuff.